Working on the old Mustang today. Going to be installing a energy suspension polyurethane control arm bushing kit for the upper and lower rear control arms of the Mustang. These guys make good stuff, made in America. The idea is to have your control arms properly located. You can see the diagram of the bushings here. The stuff is flexible. Take a look at the existing bushings. Here's a look at one of the lower control arm front bushings. You can see how offset that is. The car is up in the air and there's weight on it. You can see being up in there, the arm is actually binding on the metal. This car was in some sort of fender bender or saw the ditch or something. So I'll probably straighten that when I have this all apart. It should look something more like this. Here's another look at a bushing. Here's a look at a muffler on the car. I'm obviously going to need to replace both mufflers. So what I'm going to start with doing here is taking the exhaust off. You can see that front lower control arm bolt would actually possibly interfere with this muffler if I tried slipping it out this way. I could probably get it out, but since I'm working on the exhaust anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get the exhaust out of the way. The game plan is to take the control arms completely off the car. So the next step is to take the sway bar off. It's held on by 4 bolts, 2 on each control arm. The next step before I take the control arms out is, I think I'm going to take the coil springs out of it. So there's no tension on this thing. This Mustang has a horizontal shock back here, which is kind of goofy. I don't know if I would have to take that off or not. I'm not a Mustang expert, but I'm gonna go ahead and take that off anyway. All right. So this vertical shock is actually keeping the spring on the axle right now. And I got a tripod up underneath the axle. I'm gonna crank it up to get the pressure off the shock. I'll take the shock out and lower the side of the axle down to get the spring out. Came out with a couple isolators. Here's the setup I'm using, getting the second spring out of here. So here's the lower control arm. I got it out, and right away I noticed this bolt is just completely rusted and worn away. If I put it in there, it's really sloppy. This is a bolt from the front, and if I stick it in the new sleeve where it's not worn, it's super tight. So I'm going to go ahead and get all new bolts for this car. Another thing we're looking at here is the sleeve inside this rubber bushing looks like it might have opened up a little bit. And here these replacement ones are actually one solid piece, so that'll never happen. A little bit nicer inner sleeve. Here's a look at the coil spring isolators I took out. The upper ones actually look like they're still in pretty good shape, but the lowers are tore up, so I'll probably have to order a couple of those. Here's my control arm. The new kit didn't come with shells, so I had to reuse the shells. And I started looking at pressing them, but the problem is this rubber is bonded to these shells, and it can be difficult to press those out of there without messing up the shell or the control arm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat the shell with an oxyacetylene torch. I'm not going to get too crazy with it. I'm not going to try to mess up the metal, just enough to break that bond and push out the rubber bushing. You always want to keep this thing pointed away from you because you can't ignite and stuff and come spraying out of it. Ideally you don't want to see flames, but it is what it is. The paint is drying my lower control arms, and in the meantime, I'm going to straighten out this metal here and try and get it to look something more like this. I was cleaning up this control arm mounting point here, and I found a crack. So I'll take the time to weld that, and I might try my slide hammer on this part that's pushed in. Ripped it a little, but got it to pull out. After it's straightened, I found a couple more cracks, welded them all, shot a little bit of undercoating up onto it. Here's my control arm. You can see the original shells are still in it. If you had to replace the shells, the easiest way to get them out is to put a hacksaw on here, put a slit in it. You can pull it out, and then when you press new ones in, you got to cut spacers to keep your control arm from collapsing. I cleaned up the inside of those shells as good as I could. There is some paint in there. I'm not really too worried about it. Probably better if it was clean. But now I'm going to go ahead and push in my new polyurethane bushing. Before I do that, I'm going to put a little bit of this grease on the outside of it that they supplied with the kit. Instead of straining myself completely, I'm just going to use a vise to help send this bushing home. This kit came with these thrust washers, which are kind of nice because you keep the arm centered where it needs to be. So these will be all lubed up like the bushing and installed. And we'll lube the faces of all the bushings and then go ahead and install them in the car. Here I'm greasing up these one-piece sleeves and shoving that inside of the bushing. Here's a look at the arm with bushings and washers installed. It's amazing how good this stuff fits. I mean, Energy Suspension really seems to make good parts. I've used their stuff on about 5 or 6 cars now, and it pretty much always fits perfectly. One thing to note is I've already used up 1 tube of their grease on a single control arm, and there's 4 of them, and they only give me 2 tubes of grease. So if you do this job, you'll probably want to buy an extra thing of grease. Really sticky stuff. These are my Jegs bolt kits. I actually went to Fastenal trying to get a replacement bolts, and the guy was a total jerk there. So then I called the dealership, and they were discontinued. And next stop is Jegs, and sure enough, they had them. This bolt probably could have been designed a little better with the hole shank being thicker like that, and maybe the threads not being so long. But pretty close to the original. So I'm just going to run it. You can see the threads are actually both in the same place. New bolt's a little bit longer, but that's okay. It's not going to interfere with anything. Here's a new bolt in the control arm bushing sleeve, and you can see it's a pretty tight fit where the bigger part of the shoulder is, and that's where the edge of the sleeve is going to be riding. Here we're putting the lower control arms back in before we take the upper ones out. You can see we had the piece of wire there. Had the rear end actually suspended with a piece of wire so it wouldn't get all cattywampus.
You gotta go a little more forward. Keep going. You can see that side of it.
Okay.
So you got a hammer? Yeah.
Get a little love tap.
We're gonna go.
There it is. Here's a look at the control arm installed. You can see how those thrust washers work. And the bolts are just snugged up. Final torque will be done when the weight of the car is on the control arms. I got the bushings out of the sleeve and the rear axle. Got that all cleaned up, did it in a similar fashion as to how I got them out of the control arms. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to press the new ones in. I got the new bushing in there all greased up. I'm going to use a plate of steel and a large channel locks. I struggled with it a little bit, but there you can see it's fully seated. Here's the upper control arm with a thrust washer. This end also has a thrust washer. So I'll go ahead and install these now and just get the bolts snugged up but not torqued. Here's the upper control arm installed, and you can see the thrust washer in there. The bolts up there were actually good. I could have reused them, but I had the new ones, so I threw them in. Here are the new coil spring isolators. These are polyurethane as well. Super flexible. And these are definitely recommended for springs. It seems like those rubber ones always wear out. The rest of this project is pretty much putting it back together how it was taken apart. And the only notable thing is I'm going to set the car down on the wheels before I torque down all the control arm points, because you don't want to get some sort of weird binding with your new bushings. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.